Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another Star Wars video. Now, treat today's episode like a podcast, I guess. I've got Secret Santa with the boys and I'm super busy because, well, it's almost Christmas, so I won't be putting any visual effects in this. It will be just my voice rambling about a topic and maybe some trailer footage or something. But today we'll be talking about the Star Wars Sequel Trilogy, now that it's all fully been released to the public. Now, as a warning, there may be spoilers for episode 9 in this video. I think it's pretty likely, so if you haven't seen that yet, maybe click away and watch later. So, I'm not a sequel trilogy hater by any means. I think seeing The Force Awakens in theaters was one of my best experiences as a moviegoer. The Last Jedi, not so much, but I've come to like parts of that movie as the years have gone by. I still wouldn't say I liked it overall, but I can appreciate what Rian Johnson was going for. However, even before episode 9, something very major has stuck out to almost everyone who's watched the sequel trilogy. There's a lack of cohesive vision. I'm nowhere near the first person to say this, but it's just something that's bothered me really since we got episode 8. Episode 7, which was a quasi-remake of A New Hope, promised to set the stage for a sequel trilogy moving forward. And you know what? Because I was looking forward to what Star Wars had to offer, I was actually okay with episode 7 being so similar, because it got fans re-engaged into Star Wars and introduced some awesome new characters, and I liked almost all of them. And from that point on, I was excited to see what would happen with all of the interesting ideas and people who were introduced. However, we then got episode 8, and while I liked some of the ideas that movie explored, it felt like it was doing its own thing. It felt to me like Rian Johnson had a story he wanted to tell in the Star Wars universe, and one that he would tell regardless of what episode 7 offered up. I truly do not know what Rian Johnson was hoping episode 9 would do when he killed Snoke and didn't reintroduce any new enemies like the Empire. There's no possible way that Kylo Ren, who will be redeemed, can carry an entire movie as a villain, or at least antagonist, in my opinion. There needs to be some unifying force that brings Kylo to the light side, which is sort of what we get with Palpatine in episode 9. Like I said, there will be spoilers. Then we get to episode 9, and not only does JJ totally disregard basically everything that happened in episode 8, but he decides to tell the story that apparently he wanted to from the beginning, then shoves two movies into one in a way that's at the very least incredibly jarring and poor for the movie's content and certainly pacing. For example, I have no problem with Palpatine coming back to the sequel trilogy, and in fact that's something that I was looking forward to. I don't think it lessens and it can sacrifice, because to me sacrifice is about making an internal choice, in this case choosing to love your son rather than power, and paying for the consequences of that. I don't think you should look at sacrifices as a result-driven thing. For example, in Rebels, Kanan sacrifices himself so his friends could get away. In Halo Reach, George does the same thing. Now, is George's sacrifice ruined because the entire Covenant Armada showed up later? Is Kanan's sacrifice ruined because all he offered was his friends a chance to get away? No, I don't think so, because what's important is that the sacrifice reveals an important aspect of the character making the sacrifice, and the important thing about Anakin is turning to the light side. Now that's way off topic, but I'm just explaining why I would have been okay with Palpatine returning, but all of the bluster is taken out of his return when he needs to be set up as a villain and then also defeated in one episode, where there's also a ton of other things to do. And again, all of this comes down to a lack of cohesive vision. There's no problem with having different directors for each movie, but there should have been a guide. There maybe, if not scripts, should have been story treatments that the director and the writers had to stick to. As I said on Twitter, I'm not looking for Marvel levels of continuity. We don't need Ant-Man's second cousin who appears in the background of one scene during a flashback to be the supervillain 12 films later. However, each film in a series and in a trilogy should feel like it's serving the greater narrative. Now, it's true that George Lucas probably didn't know a lot of the story beats of the original trilogy as he was making it, but especially when you watch episode 5 and episode 6, it feels like each one is contributing to the overall story. Episode 5 doesn't derail the plot in a way that has to be fixed later on, rather it contributes to it. It gives Luke a better understanding of the Force, it serves properly as a middle chapter, and it helps develop the relationship between all of the characters, but especially Luke and Vader. Now, we don't really have that with Episode 8. That gives that film a weird feeling and forces 9 into a really uncomfortable place. What's needed, in my opinion, was a single, cohesive vision, and that's not at all controversial to say, but I think it's clear that that vision should have been George Lucas. Now, I understand why Star Wars chose not to go with that route, because George is popular now, he's sort of become retroactively popular, but he was still public enemy when Star Wars was purchased by Disney and when the new movies were announced. Still, I think even if they did want to maintain a sort of positive image for the sequels moving forward, they could have controlled for George's issues by not giving him unilateral control. And that's basically exactly what happened for Episode 5 and Episode 6 of the original trilogy. Yes, it was George's story, but there were other writers, there were directors, there were multiple people coming together to bring his vision to life. Now, with the prequels, some of that constraint was taken away, and a lot of people weren't happy with what he gave us. But we know based on Bob Iger's recent interviews that George was actually hoping that Disney would take on his story treatments. Did he have the whole works of Episodes 7 through 9 planned out? Maybe not. But if you look at the visual guide for The Force Awakens, it's pretty clear that he had some basic ideas, and we know that Star Wars was not really meant to be a 6-movie arc. I mean, even when he was doing the original trilogy, he planned for 9 or perhaps more. George had an idea, and it would have been out there, it would have probably been a little bit zany, but even if that's something Disney doesn't want, it's what I would have wanted. Other oversight or other creative contributors could have helped to control for that. More importantly, and I can say this especially after finishing Episode 9, I think a George Lucas sequel trilogy would have tied in much better to the rest of the series, because for me right now, it feels like 1 to 6 is the main arc, 7 to 9 is an addendum. And again, maybe I'm romanticizing things, but even when the execution lacked, the original and prequel trilogies had a strong, cohesive vision. Episodes 1 to 3 were to tell the fall of Anakin, something that you don't see in the original trilogy. You can make a lot of complaints about the prequels, but you cannot argue that it doesn't tie in with the original trilogy, that it doesn't form a total overall story, or that it copies what came before. I think over time we'll be able to make those connections with Episode 9. For example, I think there's a lot to be said about Kylo resurrecting Rey as sort of an inverse of what happened with Anakin and Padme. I think there's a lot to be said about destiny and everything like that, but it still feels like the 3 films are serving themselves. JJ had a Star Wars story he wanted to tell in 7, Rian in 8, and JJ again in 9. It makes the trilogy not cohesive, and it makes it not fit in with the greater narrative arc. I believe Lucas, as the creator of all things Star Wars, would have done a better job of making sure that each individual movie serves the legacy, while also helping with the issues of continuity and what feels like a power jostling between different creators. I know I've already mentioned this before, but I think JJ was very, very inflexible when he made Episode 9, but it's hard to blame him. Even without George, there should have been a master plan developed years in advance. And I mean, you can say what you want about George, but George has these visions. He's always making stupid changes that lots of us hate, because that's what he wanted to do in the first place. George's ultimate vision for the shootout between Han and Greedo had Greedo making some sound and Han not shooting first, or at least that's how he came to feel about the scene. Now, making this change offers no monetary benefit. In fact, it will piss people off, but it's what he wanted to do. And there's a Lucas quote somewhere about how if you paint your house white, or whatever color he says, it's going to piss somebody off, and maybe lots of people will think that there's better colors, but as long as you are happy with it, that's what matters. Or maybe that's not a George Lucas quote, but I saw it on Twitter. And the saddest part is, as I said, I do think George had a plan. I think he had a vision for the sequels and the Star Wars universe as it moved forward, and I really don't think we'll ever see that or even get an inkling of what it involved. I've liked the sequel trilogy. I've really liked it at some points, but there's also a lot I've disliked. However, all times there's felt like there's something missing. the presence of the creator, a unified vision, and maybe something else. Another thing is the fact that the sequel trilogy just hasn't pushed any element of film or filmmaking technology like the original trilogy and especially the prequel trilogy did. A lot of people hate Jar Jar, but he changed filmmaking forever. So did the clones in Attack of the Clones, and so did George's use of computer-generated graphics, something a lot of us harp on, but it changed the way we look at film, and nothing in the sequel trilogy did that. The most impressive thing was just the quality of the filmmaking. However, I would have loved to see how George could have pushed a modern industrial light and magic to the limit, especially with the support of Disney and all of its subsidiaries. I'm not expecting Avatar 3D or anything like that, but I do believe we would have got something that would have blown us away. I don't think, for example, that the final battle in The Rise of Skywalker would have featured almost totally reused ships, but that's a video I'll be talking about very soon. So it bums me out to make this video because I'm not a sequel trilogy hater, but it just makes me sadder the fact that we'll never see this George Lucas trilogy. I feel like there was such wasted potential here. Not even because they had the old cast together in a way that we never can again, but because we never got to get the final tale of Star Wars from George. He's almost certainly not interested in being involved now, and hell, he probably wasn't that interested based on what we did to him after the prequel trilogy. But I think it's still an interesting what-if scenario, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Without spoilers, have you seen The Rise of Skywalker? How do you rate that movie, and I guess more importantly, the sequel trilogy as a whole? If you're interested in my review, you can check it out. I did it with Corey, and I'll put a link, if I remember, in the upper right-hand corner. Now the movie has been released, by the way, my YouTube channel probably will slow down a little bit until the new year, so just be prepared for that. I guarantee with all of my videos, there are some good ones that you haven't seen yet, and I'll make a playlist of what I think are some underrated gems. But until next time, guys, have a great one. As always, this has been your host, EckhartsLadder. Be safe, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and may the Force be with you.